Welcome to the Benzano Podcast, where we're calling a spade. Great to be here with you guys today. Unfortunately, I have bad news. With displeasure, unfortunately, Caitlin Clark is ruled out for Sunday's game. But I have good news. With my utmost pleasure, with a smile on my face, I am also being ruled out for Sunday's game.
The WNBA got exactly what it asked for. Years of begging for growth. Years of marketing campaigns. Years of trying to build mainstream attention. And then Caitlin Clark arrived, and suddenly it all happened. Higher ratings. Jersey sales through the roof. New fans tuning in. The league finally had its breakout star. But instead of protecting her, celebrating her, building everything around her, the WNBA is doing something darker. They're allowing her to be targeted with dangerous physical play. They're demanding she apologize for her own popularity. They're creating impossible standards she can never meet. And if she gets seriously injured because of it, this moment will be remembered as the exact point where the league sabotaged its own future out of resentment and spite. This is the story of how success became a liability, how a transcendent talent got trapped in an impossible position, and why everyone with power needs to make a choice right now before it's too late.
Now, logically, you would think, she plays the Sparks games, maybe misses the Mercury game, but no. How else is Stephanie White going to allow Caitlin Clark to get beat up if she misses the Mercury game? Caitlin Clark has to play the Mercury game because who on the Sparks is going to beat up Caitlin Clark? You know what I mean? Who on the Sparks is going to order the code red that Stephanie White has put in? Nobody. So she's got to she's going to miss the Sparks. She's going to play against the Mercury so she can get beat up and assaulted one more time by Alyssa Thomas, by DeWanna Bonner, by Natasha Mack. You guys get the point. By Kai Copper. You guys get the point.
This became the centerpiece of the biggest controversy the WNBA has faced all season. The flagrant foul from Alyssa Thomas that went uncalled in real time. The way it dominated every conversation for days afterward. The media circus that followed. The demands for statements, for apologies, for someone to say something that would somehow make it all make sense. But before we dive into that part of the story, there's something that happened during all that chaos that tells us how the league office really views Clark and what she means to their future. Even with all that controversy swirling around, even with the Thomas incident dominating headlines, even with social media in a complete frenzy about uncalled fouls and player safety and online harassment, the WNBA still gave Caitlin Clark the Eastern Conference Player of the Month award. And that decision is more revealing than most people realize. Her numbers that month were undeniable. 21.9 points per game on 45.6% shooting from the field. 8.2 assists. For rebounds, those aren't just good stats. Those are historical numbers for a second-year player. Those are MVP caliber statistics in any season.
Thursday. Now, I said this earlier. How is Caitlin Clark going to get beat up if she doesn't play against the Mercury, right? How is Caitlin Clark going to get taken out so Stephanie White can run her offense if she's not going up against the Mercury? You know what I mean? Now, yes, I'm joking, but you know what they say. All jokes have a smidge of truth attached to it, right? Because logically, I would say, okay, the Los Angeles Sparks, they don't have Kelsey Plum. Yeah, well, we'll go head-to-head against the Los Angeles Sparks. It's more of a finesse game with them. She won't get brutalized and beat up as much against the Los Angeles Sparks. It won't be as physical against the Sparks as it would be against the Mercury. Yeah, let's put her up against the Sparks, and she'll rest the second day of the back-to-back.
You're playing in. The efficiency, the playmaking, the scoring burden she's carried for a fever team still figuring out its identity. It all deserves recognition. But here's what makes the timing significant. The WNBA could have delayed this award announcement. They could have waited for the controversy to die down before announcing it. They could have found statistical justifications to give it to another deserving player and avoided further inflaming an already volatile situation. That would have been the cautious move, the safe move, the move that wouldn't upset anyone. They didn't do that. They announced it in the middle of the chaos, right when tensions were highest, right when every decision was being scrutinized through a political lens. That choice signals something about how the league office privately views Clark and her importance to the WNBA's future, even if their public statements have remained carefully neutral throughout all of this. The controversy itself started with a play that shouldn't have been controversial at all. Alyssa Thomas delivered contact to Clark that by any objective standard should have drawn a flagrant foul. It wasn't borderline. It wasn't a judgment call that reasonable people could disagree about. It was a clear, unambiguous flagrant foul that the officials simply missed in real time. And because they missed it, what should have been a 3-second delay in the game became a 3-day media firestorm. The clip got replayed endlessly. Every angle was analyzed. Every talking head had an opinion. And because of the specific nature of the incident and the specific players involved, something else happened that was perhaps inevitable, but still depressing to watch unfold.
Publicly addressed the online hate? Let's take a look.
Do I think Caitlyn should say something? I don't think that she has the responsibility to. I think it's still a lot. It's unfair to put that on a player, but I have a lot less grace for it than I did in 2024, where I was like, hey, she just got here. There's so many people using her to, further agendas. She's a kid, blah, blah, blah. This is now 3 years into her career. And if she's silent, it's her decision to do so. And it will be read as such. I don't think she has to, but the choice to be silent is also an action, and that will be judged. And for me, this is the opinion of Roz, I think it would be cool to hear from Kayla. I think she's a good person. I'm sure she's not at all, hoping these types of things happen to her fellow colleagues of the WNBA. I think it'd be cool if she was like, yo, don't do this.
And this post actually gets community noted, noting that she's already done this before. But of course, Caitlin Clark, she did speak up.
Before going further, if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. It really helps us keep bringing you the content you love. Share this video with your friends so they don't miss out on all the drama and excitement.
The online harassment started immediately. Fans directed abuse at Alyssa Thomas. Fans directed abuse at players they perceived as supporting Thomas. The conversation moved from basketball to something uglier, something about identity and belonging and who deserved to be in the league and who didn't. It became exactly the kind of thing that makes you ashamed to be part of online communities, the kind of thing that makes you wonder if social media has broken something fundamental in how people interact with each other. And because Clark is Clark, because she's the star, because her name was attached to the incident, suddenly the conversation shifted again. Now, people weren't just talking about the foul. They were talking about Clark's responsibility to address the harassment directed at her opponents. This is where Rose Gold, a WNBA analyst and content creator, entered the conversation with a take that was measured and well-intentioned, but ultimately revealed the impossible trap that had been created. She said Clark didn't necessarily have a responsibility to address the online hate, but if she chose to remain silent, that silence would be read as an action and would be judged accordingly. And notice the evolution in how she framed this. During Clark's rookie season in 2024, Rose Gold gave her grace. She acknowledged that Clark had just entered the league, that bad actors were using her name to push agendas she never endorsed, that it was unfair to demand a 22-year-old rookie police her entire fan base. That was the reasonable position. That was the humane position. But now, 3 years into Clark's career, that grace had disappeared. Now the choice to remain silent was itself an action. Now it would be cool to hear from Caitlyn. Now the responsibility had somehow shifted entirely onto the player being targeted by physical play, rather than onto the players committing flagrant fouls or the league failing to protect its stars. This is the trap. It's a trap with no exit.
Probably start. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions, and obviously I haven't been available for like a week or so. So, first of all, I know what you guys are going to ask, and I did think it was a flagrant foul, and our reffing just needs to be better. And it's tough. Obviously, the refs are in a really difficult spot. It's one of the hardest jobs in the world, in my opinion, is to make calls. All you do is get yelled at the whole time by everybody. You're never winning. So I think for us, as the league's just got to do better protecting our players in that regard. I don't really think that it was up for debate. Obviously, it wasn't called in real time. You go back and watch the clip. I think it's pretty straightforward. It's kind of been a discussion for like 3 years now, and I think we really need to do a better job protecting the people in this league. And, obviously I've been involved in a few of those plays, but there's been plenty others across the league that, haven't got called, go back and post-game or whatever it is, teams submit clips, nothing really changes. So I think overall the league just has to do better, and we have to invest in those areas. The technology can get better. We can treat the referees a little bit better, pay them like they're full-time employees. I think things like that. And I think a lot has obviously come after that, and as I've stood up here and said before, like the harassment, the hate, None of that is okay. That goes for the opposing team we play, that goes for my teammates, that goes for my coaches. There should never be a question of character. Like, I've always stood up here and said that, and that's truly what I believe. That's how I was raised. So, none of that is okay, and I don't want anybody to ever experience that. I think it can be really frustrating to me at times, and I think it's difficult. I think a lot of people sometimes think I'm a robot. I'm not a robot. I have emotions, I have feelings, and it can be really difficult to go through a lot of that. And, I'm 24 years old trying to navigate a lot, and I think at times I've been in this world for 4 years now, and you would never change any of it, but there are times that it is hard, and there are times that, it probably affects me a little bit more than I do put on, and, I would never change any of that for the world, but I think it's important that people do remember that part of it too. So, at the same time, it's really interesting to me because, even I turned the TV on Sunday, and that game was on Wednesday, and that's all people are still talking about. And I feel like that's just a real disservice to our league. And I get it. You talk about it. You talk about whether it's flagrant. You talk about whatever it is. But to continue to beat down, and then for the narrative to be taken other places that is really just that's just really not acceptable, I think it's hard to see, and it's a disservice to my team, but it's also a disservice to the other teams in this league and the other players in this league. There's so much amazing talent, and there's so many amazing players that are playing at an incredibly high rate. And I remember, I think it was Sunday or Saturday, whatever day that was. I remember watching them discuss it on TV, and I didn't know they were going to discuss it. I was just watching the other games because I try to watch as much as I can, and I honestly felt bad for the players that were playing in the games those days. And also I felt bad for my teammates. They played on Friday, and they dominated, and they played really well, and nobody wanted to talk about that. They were just worried about everything else. So, and there had been, I think 10 plus other games that had already happened to that point. So, I think it's all of our jobs to help refocus the narratives a lot of the times.
No matter what Clark says, it won't be enough for the segment of fans and media who've decided she represents everything wrong with the league's new audience. She could give the most eloquent, thoughtful statement imaginable, and within hours someone would find a reason it was insufficient. She could call out specific toxic fans by name, and the response would be that she didn't do it soon enough, or with enough emotion, or with sufficient acknowledgement of her privilege. And here's the thing that makes it even more ridiculous. Rose Gold even admitted that Clark had already addressed this. The clip got community noted on social media, pointing out that Clark had previously condemned harassment and hate. But that doesn't matter because the demand isn't really for a statement. The demand is for continued, repeated, ritualistic acknowledgement. The demand is for Clark to center herself not as the victim of dangerous physical play, but as the beneficiary of racist fan support. That's the subtext of every call for her to speak up. That's what's really being asked. So she did what was demanded of her. So Caitlin Clark gave a press conference. She sat down and addressed the entire situation head-on. She gave 5 minutes of answers that were more revealing and more vulnerable than anything she'd said publicly before. And it's worth breaking down exactly what she said, because it shows why even this comprehensive, thoughtful statement wouldn't satisfy the people demanding it. She starts with the foul itself. She's direct about it. She says yes, she believed it was a flagrant foul. The referees just need to be better. There's no hedging, no equivocation, no trying to be diplomatic about whether it was really that bad. She's stating plainly that the call should have been made and wasn't. But then notice what she does immediately after. She pivots to empathy for the officials. She calls refereeing one of the hardest jobs in the world. She acknowledges they're constantly getting yelled at, constantly in an impossible position, constantly losing no matter what they decide. She's giving them grace even as she's calling out their failure. She understands the difficulty of their job while still demanding they do better. Then she broadens the scope of the problem. This isn't just about her. There have been plenty of other dangerous plays across the league that didn't get called. There have been plays that got reviewed after the fact with absolutely no real consequences. There have been situations where clips got compiled. Teams submitted them through official channels and nothing changed. She's advocating for systemic investment in the officiating infrastructure. Better technology, better training, better compensation, treating referees as full-time employees with full-time salaries. She's thinking about how to actually fix the problem rather than just complaining about one specific call. But then comes the part that matters most for the controversy itself. She condemns the harassment and hate clearly and unambiguously. And here's where she does something important. She expands the circle of people who deserve protection. The harassment going at her opponents. The harassment going at her teammates. The harassment going at her coaches. She's saying none of that is acceptable. There should never be a question of character about any player in this league. She's been saying that for her entire career, and she means it. This is the statement everyone claimed they wanted. It's comprehensive. It condemns hate in all directions. It shows awareness of the problem, and yet you can already predict the response it'll get. And then Clark does something that cuts through all the surface-level debate. She reveals what this is actually costing her personally. She says, "I'm not a robot. I have emotions. I have feelings. It can be really difficult to go through a lot of that. I'm 24 years old, trying to navigate a lot." She's been in this world for 4 years now, and she wouldn't change any of it, but there are times that it's hard. There are times it affects her more than she lets on publicly. There are times where the constant scrutiny, the constant demands for statements, the constant positioning of her as either savior or villain of the league is genuinely exhausting. That's vulnerability from someone who's usually composed to the point of seeming mechanical in press conferences. And then she does something that reveals her frustration with the media, specifically. She talks about turning on the TV on Sunday, 3 days after the Wednesday incident, and what's still being discussed. The flagrant foul, not the Fever's dominant Friday performance without her. Not the other 10-plus games that had already been played by that point. Just the foul, endlessly discussed, endlessly analyzed, endlessly used for content. She calls it a disservice to the league, and she's right. The WNBA spent years begging for mainstream attention. They wanted media coverage. They wanted cultural relevance. They wanted to be talked about the way the NBA is talked about. And now they have it. A significant portion of that coverage is focused on officiating controversies and fan toxicity rather than the actual basketball being played. Clark mentions feeling bad for her teammates who dominated on Friday. She feels bad for the players in other games whose performances got completely ignored because everyone was still talking about one uncalled foul 3 days later. This is Clark trying to redirect the narrative back to what actually matters. She wants to talk about the talent in the league, the competitive games, the young players emerging, the playoff races developing. She doesn't want every press conference to be about whether she's been fouled too hard, or whether her fans are racist, or whether she's doing enough to condemn people she's never met and doesn't control. And then she addresses something specific that clearly bothered her. There was a headline floating around that read something like this: is turning into a season of frustration for Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. Everything but fun and full of disappointment. And Clark's response is direct. "No one ever asked me that." The media created a narrative about her emotional state without ever actually asking her about it. They decided she was miserable. They decided the season was joyless for her. They published it as fact without verification. This is the problem with coverage that prioritizes narrative over reporting. Clark is telling journalists to discuss her play, discuss if she played badly, discuss if she played well, discuss the team's performance, but stop inventing emotional storylines about whether she's having fun or feeling frustrated without actually asking her. She ends by saying she thinks the world could use more smiling and positivity, and then gives the injury update. She'll be out Sunday, but she's feeling much better, excited to return to practice, optimistic about returning for one of the back-to-back games the following week. It's a comprehensive statement that addresses the foul, the officiating, the harassment, the media coverage, and her own mental health. It's more than she's ever given before on these topics. It's thoughtful. It's measured. It's vulnerable. It's exactly what the people demanding a statement said they wanted. And it still won't be enough. Because here's what this is really about, and you have to understand this to understand why Clark is in this impossible position. Caitlin Clark represents an audience the WNBA has spent years trying to cultivate. They wanted growth. They wanted mainstream attention. They wanted casual fans to tune in to women's basketball the way they tune in to men's basketball. They ran commercials. They invested in marketing. They talked about how women's sports was the next frontier. They tried everything they could think of to expand the audience beyond the dedicated core fans who'd been watching for decades. And then Caitlin Clark arrived, and suddenly that growth actually happened. Her games get higher ratings than other WNBA games. Her jersey sales dwarf everyone else's. Casual fans who've never watched women's basketball before tune in specifically for her. New audience members showed up. The league got exactly what it asked for. And now a vocal segment of existing fans and media resents it. They resent that Clark's games dominate the conversation. They resent that her jersey sales are so much higher than veteran players. They resent that casual fans tune in for her and tune out when she's not playing. They resent that the new audience doesn't have the same politics, doesn't share the same priorities, doesn't have the same reverence for the players who built the league before Clark arrived. The new fans didn't grow up watching the WNBA. They don't have the same emotional investment in how things used to be. They just show up for good basketball and entertainment. And for some people in the league and the media, that's unforgivable. So no statement will ever satisfy them. No amount of condemning harassment will be enough. No amount of humility or vulnerability or systemic thinking about how to fix officiating will move the needle. Because the real demand isn't for a statement at all. The real demand is for Clark to somehow make her fans disappear, or to transform them into the kind of fans the league wants, or to apologize for being more popular than players who've been in the league longer. None of that is possible. None of that is her responsibility. The WNBA has a player who's transcendent, a player who's bringing unprecedented attention and revenue, a player who's handling the pressure with remarkable maturity for someone who's 24 years old and been in the spotlight for 4 years straight. And instead of protecting her, instead of celebrating her, instead of building the entire marketing strategy around her the way the NBA did with Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and Michael Jordan and LeBron James, the WNBA is allowing her to be the target of dangerous physical play, while simultaneously demanding she apologize for her own popularity. It's self-destructive. It's short-sighted. And if you zoom out and look at it objectively, it's genuinely baffling. Look at how the NBA handled Magic and Bird. When those players arrived, the league built everything around them. The marketing, the scheduling, the media narrative. The referees were instructed to protect the stars, so the game would be appealing. If a defender fouled Magic or Bird too hard, there were consequences. The league understood that protecting its biggest draws was protecting its future. That's not what's happening with Clark. Instead, the Fever are preparing to rush her back into a game against one of the league's most physical teams. The referees have apparently been given some kind of message that physical play against Clark is acceptable. The media is allowed to create false narratives about her emotional state without verification. And the segment of the league that resents her success gets to operate without consequence. It's a recipe for disaster. Because if the Fever do rush her back Thursday against the Mercury, if she takes another dangerous foul because the officials have been trained to let physical play against her slide, if she gets injured seriously because the league won't protect its biggest star, then everyone will look back at this moment and wonder why nobody with actual power did anything to stop it. Caitlin Clark gave the statement everyone demanded. She condemned the hate. She showed genuine vulnerability about the toll this is taking on her. She advocated for systemic change in officiating and player safety. She broadened the circle of concern to include her opponents and her teammates. She did everything that was asked of her. Now the question is whether the league will actually do anything to protect her, or whether we're going to keep having this exact same conversation every single time she gets knocked to the floor with no call. The pattern is becoming clear. There's a foul. It's controversial. The media covers it endlessly. The narrative spirals. There are demands for statements. There are accusations of toxicity. There are think pieces about what it all means. The player responds. The response isn't enough. Everyone moves on until the next incident, and the next one after that, and the next one after that, because the fundamental problem isn't being addressed. The fundamental problem is that a significant portion of the WNBA would rather see Clark struggle or fail than admit that her arrival has been good for the league. This isn't a statement about basketball. This isn't really about one flagrant foul or one incident of online harassment. This is about what happens when the thing you asked for actually arrives and turns out to look different than you imagined. The league asked for growth. Clark brought growth. But the growth came with a new audience, new priorities, new ways of thinking about women's basketball. And so people can't accept that. So they've created an impossible standard for Clark to meet. No statement will be good enough. No amount of humility will be sufficient. No performance on the court will ever silence the narrative that she's the problem. And meanwhile, she's 24 years old. She's in her second professional season. She's carrying a franchise on her shoulders. She's absorbing physical punishment that would sideline other players. She's being asked to solve problems that existed long before she arrived and will exist long after she retires. She's being told she has a responsibility to police her fan base, while simultaneously being told that her very existence is the problem. She's being asked to condemn harassment while being told that her silence is violence and her speech is privilege. She's in an impossible position, and the league's silence about it is deafening. If the WNBA actually cared about player safety, they would make an example of flagrant fouls against Clark the way they would against any other star player. If they actually cared about addressing online toxicity, they would invest in better moderation and consequences for harassment across the entire league, not just when it happens to involve their biggest star. If they actually cared about protecting Clark, they wouldn't rush her back against the team most likely to test her physically. They would take the logical path, ease her back against a less physical opponent, and give her body time to fully recover. But they're not doing any of that. Instead, they're doing something more cynical. They're allowing the situation to continue because controversy drives engagement. Because the endless cycle of foul, outrage, statement, and media debate actually generates content and viewership. Because a league that's desperate for mainstream attention has discovered that even negative attention is still attention. So they allow the physical play to continue. They allow the media narrative to spiral. They allow Clark to be in an impossible position. And they tell themselves it's all just part of the game. But it's not part of the game. It's a choice. It's a choice the league is making. And if Clark gets seriously injured because of that choice, if her career is derailed by preventable injuries sustained because the league won't protect her, if the moment when women's basketball finally had a mainstream breakout star is remembered as the moment the league sabotaged itself out of spite and resentment, then that will be the defining story of this era. Caitlin Clark did her part. She gave the statement. She showed the vulnerability. She advocated for change. She condemned the hate. She did everything that was asked. Now it's on the league. Now it's on the coaches. Now it's on the referees. Now it's on the fans. Now it's on everyone else who has actual power to decide whether they're going to protect their biggest star or whether they're going to keep having this same conversation every time she gets knocked down with no call. The clock is ticking. The Fever are preparing to bring her back. The Mercury are waiting. And the question that matters now is simple. Will the league actually do anything, or have we all just accepted that this is how things work now? That controversies are content. That statements are theater. That player's safety is negotiable depending on who the player is and whether her popularity is convenient or threatening to the existing power structure. Caitlin Clark is 24 years old. She has her entire career ahead of her. She has the potential to be one of the greatest players to ever play the game. But not if the league keeps pushing her toward physical danger. Not if the referees keep letting flagrant fouls slide. Not if the media keeps inventing false narratives about her emotional state. Not if everyone with power continues to demand she apologize for being successful, while simultaneously placing her in positions where she's vulnerable to serious injury. The statement was given. The moment of truth is coming. And when we look back on this era of women's basketball, we'll either see it as the moment the WNBA finally protected its star and set itself up for long-term growth, or the moment it sabotaged itself because it couldn't handle success that looked different than imagined. Which version of history we get depends entirely on what happens next. And that choice isn't up to Caitlin Clark anymore. It's up to everyone else. And they need to decide soon, before it's too late.